Hi, and welcome to this video of Dynamics 365 Talk, where I'll be discussing SLAs in a unified interface. You might have noticed that SLAs moved to the unified interface when you turned on the 2020 release wave 1, but there's also some changes and improvements that were made to SLAs, which I'll be discussing in this video. But before we get into it, let me introduce myself. My name is Dion Taylor, and I am a Microsoft Business Applications MVP. So feel free to check out my blog at d365goddess.com, follow me on Twitter at d365goddess, or connect with me on LinkedIn by scanning the QR code on the screen. Now, what are SLAs? SLAs are service level agreements that define the level of service organizations offer to their customers. So, for example, if we're using SLAs with cases, then an organization might want cases for gold level customers to get resolved in 1 day, while silver level customers are promised a resolution within 2 days. SLAs in Dynamics 365 are used to keep track of these rules, and we can configure actions such as status updates to the case and notification and warnings, those could be emails, that will happen when a case is close to nearing noncompliance or even becoming noncompliant altogether. Now, SLAs can be used with several different entities, but in this example, I'm going to focus on using them with cases. And one of the reasons for that is also because cases are already enabled for use with service level agreements. Now, let's talk about SLAs and all of the related entities, because there's a bunch. SLAs are made up of SLA items, and there can be multiple SLA items attached to one SLA. Now, SLA items hold the logic that determines when an SLA is actually applicable, what the success conditions are, and the amount of time that passes before an SLA is considered to be non-compliant or when it's nearing non-compliance. Now, it does that by comparing the current date and time with another date field, and that field is stored on the SLA KPI record and is called applicable from. This field is also used to trigger the SLA once it's applied to a case. Now, another thing that's very important to understand is the SLA KPI field on the SLA KPI form. Now, this field holds the SLA KPI instance lookup field on the case entity. And I'll talk about what exactly that is in the next slide. Each SLA item has a many-to-one relationship to SLA KPI records, which means that there is an SLA lookup field on the SLA item entity. So once an SLA is applied to a case, it still needs to be triggered. So once the SLA is triggered, the system will create one SLA KPI instance record for each SLA item on the attached SLA and attach it to the case. Now, the SLA KPI instance records hold the failure time, the warning time, and the time that the SLA item succeeded. All of this is calculated from the logic that is on the SLA item that it's attached to. Now, out of the box, there are two SLA KPI instance lookup fields on the case entity. And these fields can be tied to the SLA KPI record that I just mentioned before. So here's where you see that SLA KPI, you can see that that's linked to the resolve by KPI field, which is a lookup to the SLA KPI instance entity. When the SLA KPI instance records are created, they're populated in these corresponding lookup fields. Now, this is important to understand because this means that we can pull this data into a case view. And we can also use them to put a timer control on the case form, which will count down to the failure time for each KPI. So I hope that wasn't too confusing. And let's dive into Dynamics 365. So if you want to go ahead and configure those SLA and everything related to the SLA, what you have to do is you can actually go here. As you can see, I'm in the Customer Service Hub, and you can go here to Service Management. Let me actually make this a little bit, zoom in a little bit. So here is Service Management. Now, the first thing that you need to do is set up your SLA KPIs. You can see that I already created 3 of them. So basically all you have to do is pick a name here, and then here you're going to select the entity. So let me just go ahead and create case entity. And this is what you saw earlier, that SLA KPI field, which is related to that lookup field, to that SLA KPI instance. Right? So you need to have those fields. You can see here that I actually created an additional one, assignment KPI, but the first response by KPI and the resolve by KPI fields are already there out of the box. And then you can set, let me just go ahead and pick one of those, first response by, and then you can set the applicable from field. So which field do you want to kick this off from, right? And which field do you want to use to start calculating the time that is left, right, before we actually are non-compliant, or before we're close to nearing non-compliance. So this is the time, date, and time fields that you can pick from here. Now, I'm obviously not going to do that because I already created mine. So I'm going to go back to SLA KPIs. Now, what you need to do is you need to activate them. You can see here I created actually 2 for leads as well. So all you have to do is just go ahead and navigate to the inactive SLA KPIs and then click on activate, and that will put them in this active list that you see over here. That's the first thing that you want to do. The second thing you want to do is to then actually start creating those service level agreements themselves. So all you have to do is you can just click on the new button. You can start typing in the name, and then you actually select the entity, right, that you want to use for that. And because I now have, right, lead has those lookups as well, as you saw earlier, so I can select my lead entity as well because I have enabled that as well for SLAs. But I'm going to do case. You can put a description in here. Like I said, you can put a name in here, and then you can just hit save and close. Now, again, I've already created a blank one. Here's my default SLA. Primary entity, the case, and you can also see that you cannot change that, right? Once you pick that entity, you can't change it to another one. Now let's talk about the SLA items. We're going to give it a name, so I can say this is my first response oops, 2 hours. And then I'm going to pick that KPI that we created earlier, right? So I'm going to do my first response. And then I can also put in business hours. And that's really that when, if we want to set, right, a particular time that we're open, and that's what the time that we want to use for calculation. So I'll show you that in a second. So here's customer service. As you can see, that's from 8 to 5. And then I can just, obviously I need to save that. Oops, I can't even save that yet. As you can see, I first have to put the success conditions in here. So you can put some applicable when, and for example, if I wanted to only run this for gold customers, I can say I want to do a related entity. And that related entity, let me see here. It's not the content, it's customer. And if the customer account, now we're going to look for the field. I believe it's called level. Oops. Level tab equals gold. Let's do that. So I want this is only applicable for gold customers, right? Then my success condition is going to be, I'm just going to add a row. And I'm going to say first response sent equals yes. So when the first response sent field equals yes, I consider that that's exactly what I wanted. That means that my first response went out. Now, if I scroll down a little bit further down, we also have warned conditions and failure conditions. And you can see that by default, they're set to 30 minutes and 1 hour. So I'm going to set them to 1.5 hour and 2 hours for failure. Now, this basically means that if this success condition has not been met, I want to send a warning in 1.5 hours, and I want it to be failure after 2 hours. And again, the field that we're using for that to calculate that is on that first response KPI. So let me just go ahead and save this. And let me actually click on that first response KPI. Sure, we'll navigate back in a second. And that field is the follow-up by field. So that's what it's going to look at, and that's also what's going to kick it off, right? Once it's attached to that case. As soon as this has data, it's going to run that through that logic. So let's go back here. And here's our first response by 2 hours. That is only going to run for those gold customers. Okay, so what do we want to happen right after 1.5 hours when it's still not a success? The first response field still does not have that yes field checked. What do we want to happen? And what do we want to happen after 2 hours, right? If we are actually failing, if we're not getting this done, and we're not compliant. Well, we're actually going to click on configure actions, and that's going to take us to Power Automate, and that's where we're going to set up our logic. So let me just go ahead and click on that. And as you can see, it's just going to go ahead and connect, and I'm going to click on continue, and a lot of this stuff is already in here, right? So it says in here, don't touch this piece of flow, do not touch this piece either, and don't delete any of these. These are basically what you saw earlier, right? We have our nearing non-compliance, and what that is our warning time. So let me go back here. That is the warning. What do we want to happen then? And then we have failure. And a failure is if it's not compliant, what do we want to happen? And then lastly, if we were successful, what do we want to do, right? So you're just going to go ahead and click on this, and then I'm going to add an action because I'm going to update my case when it's nearing non-compliant. So I'm going to say update record, and we want to use the common data service current environments update step. So we're going to go and update the case. So I'm going to select the cases entity. Here we go. And the item ID, I want to update the unique identifier of the record that this service level agreement SLA is related to, right? And I want the value. So I'm just going to go ahead and pick that. That's my case now. So the case that's attached to this, I want to update that. And this is for my first response. So I'm just going to search for that field. First, I'm actually going to expand this. And now I'm going to start typing in here. There's a little search box. I'm not sure if you guys can see it or not. Probably not. So I'm going to type in first response. And I'm going to have 5 options. And I want to update my first response SLA status. So what we said here was if it's nearing non-compliance. So I want to set that status to exactly that, nearing non-compliance. And then I could also even send an email to somebody to say, hey, you know what? This is nearing non-compliance. Maybe somebody needs to take a look at that. So let's go ahead and add another action. And let's just go again to say send an email. And I'm just going to go ahead and do send email. And who am I going to send this to? Maybe I'm going to send this to the owner, or maybe I'm going to send this to the owner's manager. So you would be able to kind of pull that out. Or maybe you have a distribution list that you want to send this email to, right? With those warning messages. So let's just say this is warnings at, warning at company.com, right? Then we can put a subject in, nearing compliance. And like I said, the other thing what we could do is we could send it, for example, to the owner of the case, right? Or the manager of the case. We would have a step before here where we're actually getting that person's email address. But I'm not going to do that right now. So and then we're going to specify the body of the email, and then we can just go ahead and grab the information from this update record, right, from that case. So I'm going to say case number, case number. I want to put that in here, nearing non-compliance, and then the case number as well. So you can put now data related to this case in here, right? So I'm going to say case, I'm going to say case title. That's what we want to do. We probably want to do a space. Case title is nearing non-compliance, right? And that's maybe everything we want to do here. And you know what? For testing purposes, let me just go ahead and send this to myself. Okay. Now that's what we're doing when we're nearing non-compliance. What do we want to do if this particular thing is succeeded? I actually don't want to do anything. Or you know what? I probably do. I want to probably update that case again and set it to succeeded. So update record. And we don't want to pick this one. We want to pick the current environments. There we go. And again, we're going to say cases. And we're going to again do the unique ID, which is the regarding value. And then I'm again looking for the first response field. And here we go, first response SLA status, and I'm going to say this has succeeded. Great, and I don't need to send an email or anything like that. Then what do we want to do when we're not compliant? We're going to do the same thing. We're going to do update record. And again, that's in the current environments, cases. There we go. And again, we're going to get that unique ID. And oops. Again, we're going to look for that field. First response, SLA status. And this is non-compliant. And this is mainly that we're updating these values so that we can see this in a chart, right, on a dashboard. And then probably you want to send out another email, but I've already showed you how to do that. So I'm just going to go ahead and save this. Oh, send an email. There is, the to field is required. Yeah, obviously, because otherwise it doesn't know where to send it to. Oops. Let's go ahead and do that. And then let's save this. Okay, and then let's set that case or the SLA. Actually, I can now go ahead and activate that. And obviously we could do the same thing. We just had one. Let me just activate this. We had one that's the first response within 2 hours, but we can have multiple SLA items there, right? But let's go ahead and try this. We're going to set this as a default SLA. And let's now create a case. So I'm going to go ahead and create a case here. just create it for one of these customer. AdventureWorks, that's fine. Amos. Test case for video. And then I'm just going to go ahead and save and close. There we go. Here's my case. And remember, we were using, let me just actually open this up again to go to the first response field. This is the applicable from field, right? The follow up by field on that case. So let's go ahead and let's go to cases. And I said something about video. Here it is. So here's the case that we just created. Now, we did not populate this follow-up by field yet, so we don't have a first response due or a resolution due. And if I looked at the enhanced SLA details, that's where the SLA KPI instance records will be created. Now, I've also set this case, or not this case, this SLA, as you saw, to be a default one, right? So there is a setting actually in CE. If you go here to administration and you go to system settings, here are some of those SLA settings, right? So you got to make sure that, for example, you don't disable this, obviously, right? So here's some things here that you have to think about as well. So let's go back to that case, and let me first just kind of show you that the SLA is actually attached already. And for that, I actually have to change my process here to another one that actually shows that field. So let me switch this back to customer service. If I click here on identify, you can see here that my case default SLA has been applied to it already. But this is also the field where you can just manually apply a different one if that would be necessary. So I'm just going to go ahead and populate my follow-up fields. Let's say, that I needed to go ahead and start my countdown at 4 p.m. Let's just go ahead and save that. So that is, right, we're going to start the countdown from 4 p.m. And let me actually click here on Enhanced SLA. So you see that nothing has happened, and that's most likely because in that SLA, I'm actually saying that this is only for gold customers, right? So let's take a look at AdventureWorks, and let's see what level they are. And here we can see that level doesn't have any data. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to Active Transport. See, and make them a gold level, and let's create a case for them. So I'm just going to, those are opportunities, those are quotes, here are my cases. I'm going to create a case. Just put in new case for video 2. And I'm going to save and close that. Now let's go ahead and view that record. So let's pick that business process flow again so we can actually see that that case has actually been attached to the case. All right, and we saw earlier that the active transport is a gold level. So let's go ahead and start populating these fields. Now I'm going to set this follow up by field because again, we saw that that was the field that actually kicks this off. I'm going to set this to May 4th, and I'm going to set this the follow-up by to, let's just go ahead and say 10 a.m. and I'm going to go ahead and save that. What the system is now doing is it's going to look at this particular field and it's going to obviously calculate that first response due field. And what it does is obviously it starts to count down the total time until that first response by date and time is there, right? So it's going to take 2 days, 19 hours, 28 minutes, and 0 seconds, right? It's counting down to that particular date and time. Now, let's go back to the SLA real quick, right? So that we can take a look at that SLA items. So the first thing that happened is that it actually looked at the first, here we go, the first response SLA KPI. So this is what actually kicked off that SLA. This is why it started running, right? So it was kicked off by this. Then what it did is when it got kicked off, it looked at the logic in here when it was applicable. And we said it is applicable when the account related to this case, and I'm going to give it a second while it loads. While that level field, if that equals gold, then yes, we want the system to start looking at this. And this is where we can see that, right? A customer account, the level needs to be gold, right? Then it's going to use, again, that same field that we just saw on that first response KPI, that follow-up field that I populated in the case, to actually calculate my warning hours, my warning time, date and time, and my failure date and time, right? By basically looking at today's date and time and then comparing that to that field. So now let's go back to the case. If I go to Enhanced SLA Details, this is where we're going to be able to see those SLA KPI instance records. That's what you see over here. So you can see here, my failure time is 12 p.m. and my warning time is 11:30 p.m. Because again, what we said, let's go back into the summary, is that we're going to use this field to calculate those values with, right? So 5/4/2020, which is on a Monday at 10 a.m., right? So we said let's go back here again. Warning, 1.5 hours. Failure, 2 hours. So 10 a.m. plus 1.5 hours is 11:30. That's my warning time. Plus 2 hours is 12 o'clock. Now, the other thing that you want to take a look at is actually right over here. Those are the customer service hours. That's really the business hours that were open. And this is basically telling you or asking you, do you only want me to do those rules and these calculations within those business hours? So let me show you how I actually have that set up. And I'm going to close this. I'm going to go here to customer service schedule. And you will be able to see here when this loads that these are my times from 8 o'clock to 12 p.m. It's 4 hours. Then I'm going to be closed for 1 hour between 12 and 1. And then again, back from 1 to 5. So the total working hours for a day is 8 hours. Now, this is very important because if I would have created a case for, let's say, Friday, right, previously to this, maybe Friday 5/1 at 4 o'clock, that would mean that I would still have 1 hour of working time, right? That's what that means. So it's going to include that in my calculations. Let's actually go ahead and create another case. And let's do that for the same active transport account so I can show you that. Active transport. And let's just say, oops, we don't care about that. Another case for video 3. And let's just go ahead and do save and close again. And let's take a look at that record. And let's make sure that it's actually attached. And no, it's not attached yet. Oh, that's because I actually, oops. Let me just go back here because I turned it on, but I did not make it a default one. So let me just go ahead and do that. I can actually manually, here we go. Let's go ahead and attach that manually. Good thing we checked. And now let's go ahead and put again those follow-up by. So let's say we need to follow up by, we're going to start this calculation from 8/5, which I believe is a Friday, and we're going to start here at 4 p.m. That means we're going to have 1 hour left, right? 1 business hour from 4 to 5. That's business hours, right? We close at 5. Okay, let's take a look what it says now. The enhanced SLA details. Now it's going to say my failure time is going to be 9 a.m. on 5/11, and that is, if I'm not mistaken, a Monday. 5/11 is a Monday. Yeah, so basically what it's saying is I'm going to have 2 hours totally, right, to assign this, which means from 4 to 5 is my working hours. Then we close at 5 o'clock and we're closed for the weekend, right? So then I have an additional hour between 8 and 9 of that workday on Monday to assign, or to, whoops, not to assign, to basically get my first response. So that's how that works, and that's also how those calendars are related to this. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit that like button. Be sure to check back again next week for yet another video. Thanks so much, and I hope you have a great day.